There is a kind of paradox that many managers fall into where they expect their people to be logical, emotionless, almost drone-like workers. And that overlooks the fact that actually humans by our nature are emotional. You cannot expect anyone to leave their emotions at the door or even at home. So let's talk about this problem, this concept, and many others today. I'm joined by Ira Leppänen of a company called Emergy, and her work is all about the concept of emotional agency in the workplace and how we can all become better at being empathetic, authentic, and accountable whilst building better, more engaging workplaces. So this is going to be an interesting one. It's a topic we've not really covered in detail before, and I hope you all find it useful. This is Leading with Integrity, Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who are working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, people-first leaders. Each week, you will learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who get the best from their teams. And we'll achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, people who have already walked this path and have some amazing insights to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes like this one and some group chats where we'll have multiple guests. My name is David Hatch and I will be your host. And leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses during 15 years in the aerospace industry, 5 or 6 of those at the end of that career were in a space startup in the UK. So trying to launch satellites into orbit, very cool stuff. And through all of that experience, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership. And in turn, the secret to great leadership, it's all about your integrity, putting people before profits.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, David, for the invite. Me too. Very much looking forward.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one, I'm sure. And a very interesting topic as well that we've not really covered before. So let's get into it. So I think best place to start, as ever, is hand over the virtual microphone to you to introduce yourself, tell the listeners a little bit about your business, your background, how you've ended up where you are, and what you get up to today.
Yep, thank you. Happy to do that. So my name is Ira. I come from a company called Emergy, which is the forerunner and specialized in developing, studying, and training emotional agency for individuals and organizations. So what on earth does that mean? It means that we bring tangible skills, adaptable processes for people to better lead themselves and others. And I will get back to that. But before going into that, I want to share my story, how I ended up here. So I've been with Emergy for 5 years. I'm one of the partners, and I'm an entrepreneur, a leadership coach and trainer, and have had the privilege to work with different individuals, organizations in various sectors for the past 5 years. But before that, I had a completely different career. Have a background in finance, so I graduated with a master's degree in finance. Started my career in the financial services sector in a private bank, and then moved to the big four companies where I spent 10 years or so leading different projects, doing management consulting, especially in the financial services sector. And after that, a client wanted to hire me to build up a project management office and establish a business development function. So I shifted over to the other side of the table and spent 6 years leading teams and different IT projects in the second largest financial institution in Finland. So how on earth do I made us completely turn over on my career, and the people that knew me when studying or in my early career years, they were like, how on earth, like, I would have never guessed that you would start talking about emotions at work. You would be the last person to talk about it. And the sort of funny part of that is that I truly believed and hoped in my early years in the career that people would keep their emotions and personality out of the office, because all they do is mess up and complicate things. And, you should just stick to your goals and do your best, and the good old carrot and the stick, and that's it. But I soon realized in the projects, I became a team lead, and I realized that I had been completely wrong with my assumptions on how people behave. First of all, we're not rational at all. And people come to work as they are, with emotions. So it makes actually a lot of sense to start understanding the human factor in the workplace. And so I started using that and exploring that part of what does it mean to be a human being at work. And I really loved being a leader. What I mean by that is the part that I most enjoyed in my work, although I've always been super goals oriented and getting things done and that, I loved achieving the goals and getting the projects to reach their goals. But the most fun I had was coaching people to help them unleash the potential, to grow, to see them, getting ready for the new adventures and exploring their own growth journeys, and to be able to support in that. So that part of me started to really come to the surface. And so today, why I joined Emergy, two things. I want to make work-life better for individuals and businesses. So the finance part in me emphasizes the business results. But the other part is we need well-being people. We need well-being added, human factor added to the workplace context in order to thrive especially in these turbulent times and in times of insecurity. So that's one. And the second part is that the whole backbone of Emergy trainings is in academic research. So everything we do is scientifically proven research, and that's what we continue to do. So both well-being and business results packed together.
Wow, what an interesting journey as well. You're right. It's not generally two things that aren't really seen as going together, as finance and then dealing with the emotions. But it's interesting the way you describe that. It made me think of a manager I used to work for. It was the business at the time was going through some, let's call them challenging times. And so quite a few of us would get quite frustrated and quite angsty and even angry sometimes about it. And this guy's response to that was just to say, well, leave your emotions at the door. That's not what it's about. And you just, oh man, when you're already frustrated and you get something like that in response, it's so counterproductive.
Yeah,
and I think you're absolutely spot on when you say people are emotional creatures. Like you can't check it at the door. It's part of who we all are as humans. Best will in the world. Nobody makes a decision without some aspect of emotion playing into that.
Absolutely.
And so I think, it's really important to recognize that, I guess.
It's fundamental to understand that factor because it's there. It's impacting people. And as we have studied many, many years, how emotional skills and emotional agency can impact in a positive way success of any change transformation or strategy implementation. One thing that we discovered with the researchers was that the unaddressed and unspoken negative emotions are the biggest deal breaker, are the biggest showstopper for progress. So just as you said, frustration is an integral part of everyone's, we feel frustrated many, many times every single day. And working with different companies and seeing the learning curves and that, frustration is there. Even with the best companies, with the best teams, with the best business units, frustration is there. The question is, how do we deal with that? Just as you said, whether it's like leave it on the doorstep or with a curious mindset asking, so David, tell me more. What's the one thing that's not taking place? What makes you frustrated?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, ultimately, if you want to be leading entities that have no emotions, then you probably shouldn't be dealing with people. Maybe go and use ChatGPT or something instead,
Exactly. And then to understand that they are the showstopper, but they are also the fuel for progress. If people are not emotionally attached to their KPIs or strategic initiatives or quarterly targets, it won't take place. We need the emotional attachment to commit ourselves. So, yeah, I would say it's irrational to leave that out of the equation.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's certainly missing a trick, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned emotional agency, and I think that's quite an interesting phrase.
Yes.
So what do you mean by that, and why is it such an important thing to get right?
Yes. A topic that I love to speak about because it leverages on the research done for decades on emotional intelligence. But the limitation with emotional intelligence is that it's linked to individuals. When we talk about organizational development, we need a concept that takes into account the interpersonal, the group level dynamics, and that's when the emotional agency kicks in. So it takes into account that we offer individuals tools and skills to cope with their own emotions and also to deal with that in various interactions through their, work-life encounters. And then how to leverage, how to make the ripple effect on an organizational level. We build in systems and processes that support the integration of these skills so that we actually create an organizational competence. And in the heart of that is joint learning. So there are elements of psychological safety, but also one thing that I want to mention is it's not a personality trait. As I said, in the heart of that lies understanding that it is something that we can develop, and it's actually something that we can develop rather fast. So we see impact coming in weeks or even months after starting a journey together. So that's one of the key figures. Emotional climate can change in an instant, whereas cultural development takes decades or years to come. So individual accountability, everyone to understand that I am part of the system. As we will be talking about leadership role, but still one part of that is that every single person in a team, business unit, or organization, every single person understands that I am also accountable. I am part of the system. So what do I bring with me? How do I take responsibility of my reactions? I'm an active member of the system. I don't know if that explains it at all, but yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And it sounds like a good idea, obviously.
Yeah. And it's not just an idea.
Yeah.
We have developed it together with the top universities. The researchers have actually found this concept through our joint research and development studies. And it's actually internationally accredited new approach for organizational development. So, yeah, because one thing that I think needs to, it's worth mentioning, we're living the times that change is one of the core elements. Change is there. So as individuals, we need to build resilience, but we need to build resilience also as organizations. How do we create well-being and business thrive in uncertain times? We cannot do the good old waterfall approach where we train first the leaders and then the middle management and then the staff. but we actually need to have a wider and scalable ripple effect to make the change happen. And that's what we can accomplish with emotional agency.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm always loved hearing about things like this where there's science and there's research to back it up. Because I think one of the most frequent counter arguments to this kind of thing that you hit from potential clients, from managers, from the kind of vested interests in inverted commas is, well, that's an all very nice idea, but it's not realistic for my business, or it's not going to help my bottom line, or why should I do this? And actually, if there's scientific data behind it, if there's studies there that prove it does have the right impact on that side of the company, as well as looking after the people better, that's just so much more powerful for me. And as I say, I always love seeing things like that.
Yes. And I mean, as I said, I have the finance dude in me. So I'm all about the, the bottom line. So we research, we study the impact on also the financial figures as well. Our clients typically can reduce their sick leaves, mental health related sick leaves, by 25 to 35%. Yes. So there's money involved. Another thing is we can help businesses to have better retention. People are not leaving the companies where they are treated well, where there is psychological safety, sense of belonging, and sense of belonging and the feeling of loneliness are something that, a lot of the HR people are struggling with. So this is one of the things. We can significantly increase people's commitment to the organization, not only to their specific work role, and also in that sense build back the sense of belonging that we are all craving after the 3 past years. So fundamental elements to positively counter-strike the phenomena that we're globally seeing in work life.
Yeah, and it's never been more important, I would argue. What role can leaders and managers play in this? You mentioned 2 aspects of it. I guess it's organizational culture, isn't it? And then the emotional climate. People in various leadership positions are under the radar. People who are led by these people are observing their facial expressions, their tone of voice, their reactions. So whether we like it or not, we better start with ourselves, with the self-awareness. What's happening in me, and then expand it to the external self-awareness. How do people around me feel when they are interacting with me? So what kind of impact do I do? The leader's example and influence is undeniable. It's there. And at the same time, I want to emphasize one of the aspects of emotional agency. It's not only the leader's responsibility. With emotional agency, we create accountability where every single person in a team or organization understands their role and impact. So one of the fastest sort of response or feedbacks that we have received with working with various leaders is that this makes my life easier. I'm not responsible for everyone's, well-being and business performance. It's creating an atmosphere, an environment where people feel safe. They feel seen, they feel understood, appreciated. They have, everyone has an innate need for autonomy and feeling of being in control. The way we lead people will have a serious impact on, will people feel safe or are they fearful because of what's happening around? So it's human to human in very simple terms. And I think that's one of the factors that we talk a lot with the leaders, to be more of who you are in a responsible way. Hype in these times don't work, but realistic hope, relatedness is something that people are craving for. And if they see that the leaders really care, and if the leaders are willing to share something of their inner world, what do I fear? What do I think? Something of what's happening in me.
That's how we build trust in these times.
I agree. I think you really what you're talking about is authentic leadership, isn't it? It's being vulnerable. It's sharing your own experiences. It's empathizing with people who are going through very similar struggles most of the time anyway. And I think you're right. When we're facing difficult times, I mean, it's been a tough few years, hasn't it? We've had pandemic, we've had war in Europe again, we've had supply chain shocks, economies not quite circling the drain yet, are they? But they're certainly having difficulties. And so it's so easy, isn't it, to the leader in that kind of situation, you just kind of turn in on yourself and close yourself off, and you just worry about your role, your job, your mortgage, and so on. But actually, the people you're leading, what they're looking for in these difficult times is you to step up, be that compassionate leader, be more empathetic, be more authentic, and show that you still care about them. You're doing the best you can to look after them. And exactly as you say, I mean, that will build loyalty, it will build trust. And when we come out of the slump, when we're back up on the peak again, they'll look back and remember that you were the men or women looking after them in the difficult times.
Exactly. And one of the nice outcomes is also that the traditional hierarchical leadership style is often one-way street. You know, it rarely loops back. But with this kind of, as you talk, authentic leadership, showing that you care, showing the human side of you, it actually loops back. When you're having a bad day, your team members will most probably come to you and they have the guts to ask you, so David, I sense that you're not yourself. Is everything okay? You know, so you start to feel that same caring, because that's something that we need, irrespective of the role. Everyone needs to be seen and, you know, treated respectfully and to be understood. That's a human factor. It's not related to the rank or title or role.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so much of leadership is reciprocal, isn't it? And I think too many managers don't realise that. Yeah. And they get tied up in the job, the title, the bigger paycheck, all these other things.
Exactly.
But actually, I mean, we talk about trust, respect, caring, loyalty, all of these things. You give them to get them, don't you, really? You can't expect it to be a one-way street. Next question then, how can leaders ensure that they are building the right kind of atmosphere in their teams? What can they do? Some practical steps, perhaps?
I wish I could give you do these 3 things and it's bulletproof, but no.
How about 5?
I believe that in the core of that, first of all, you need to want to be a leader. You need to have the innate curiosity towards human beings. And that's, I mean, I'm serious with that question. And that's something that every leader should be asking. Do I have the authentic curiosity towards understanding human beings in the work-life context today? Am I willing to contribute to the well-being and the growth of other human beings? There are a lot of elements, but one of them is listen, be curious, show that you care, show genuine interest towards people. Because even if we're leading groups or groups of people, business units, companies, it happens through individuals. So every single person, if you understand that the human need is to be seen, is to feel understood and feel that I am appreciated as a human being in this complex world, in this group of people, and you try to treat me with respect, that's how you build the sense of belonging. And then the second part is to understand that work life is not fun at all times. That's something that we should, get rid of, that continuous hope for it to be better. This is what's happening to have the courage to work with what is, to have the courage to understand if I want people to feel all excited, to do the check-in and understand where are my people, is there room for enthusiasm or are they more frustrated, cynical? ashamed or regretful or whatever is happening there, we need to understand the situation and have the guts to have that tough dialogue. So what's happening in you? How can I help you? And not try to force people to feel all excited all the time. So again, authenticity about myself, authenticity and courage to address whatever is happening. That's how we build trust, because even with the best companies, it's not all fun. They feel overwhelmed. They feel frustrated. There is sorrow and sadness. And they have the tools and courage to work with that. And at the same time, or simultaneously, on the other hand, they have the courage and the wisdom to enforce the authentic positive emotions. So what I want to say with this is that all the studies that we have done back with other international studies show that when you want to build a thriving environment where people are feeling safe and they have a good sense of belonging and there's well-being and engagement, it is not only positive. The emotional climate is rich and diverse. And to deal with that, to operate with that,
I really like that. And I think your first point particularly is quite important. And I think it speaks to the whole authenticity piece and why that is such a meaningful and powerful tool for a leader. But also it's something that you can't necessarily fake. So if you don't want to be a leader, if you don't genuinely have that interest and caring about people, it's really difficult to fake it till you make it. You know, people
Absolutely.
talk about that, but it doesn't work.
No.
And particularly in the workplace, people notice really easily, I think. Like, you can't hide that.
No, and yet a lot of leaders underestimate that capability in people. Can I share an example?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Because one example came to my mind. I was coaching a COO who was preparing the slide set presentation for an upcoming monthly staff meeting or town hall. And their situation was that key talent, especially middle management, had left the company for a reason or another. And so he was preparing a slide deck on, so how are we going to solve this? We're starting recruitment and da-da-da-da. And I was listening to him and I sensed the need to say that, you know what? I feel nothing. I feel absolutely nothing when you present me the pretty slides and the very robust and thoroughly thought plan. And I asked him, could you share with me, how does it make you feel when your top talent is leaving the company? And he was like, well, why do you care? I'm like, just play along. How does it make you feel? And he shared with me. It was funny, his energy calmed down and he said, I feel so sad. It's a pain in my heart. I don't want people to leave this company. I hope this is the place where people feel good. They want to stay. And so that we can offer them a place, a safe place, and enough encouragement and adventure and growth potential and interesting roles to grow within this organization. And I'm so sad, deep in my heart, for people to leave. And then I asked him, so what if instead of those slides, or at least before those slides, would you be willing to share something of what you just shared with me, with everyone? And he was like, oh, I've never done this before. Like, what if you tried? And so he did. And you know what happened? I'm sure you guessed the rest of the story, but he called me afterwards saying, I've never received such a great amount of positive feedback from people across the organization, even those people that have never met me before. Like, there you go. Because the whole point is, even if our rational mind tells us you need to solve the problem, but we're jumping ahead of the situation. We're not reading the room if we do that. We're offering something that the people are not expecting even. But the people are wanting to know, how do leaders feel? What do they think? What do they fear in this kind of real life crisis? And so that's a great example, because he has then afterwards followed that kind of approach, sharing something of his inner world with the people. And he has told me that there is a whole new kind of connectedness, whole new kind of trust and sense of belonging in the group, in the organization. And the only difference is that he has opened something of his inner world. How does he feel about these different work-life encounters or situations as a human being?
That is an amazing example, I have to say. And I think courage is the word you mentioned a couple of times, and that is it, isn't it? It's because it is difficult, and particularly if you've never done it before, and there's that fear of judgment, there's potentially shame as well, if it's particularly in that kind of circumstance. And so it does take self-awareness to recognize how you actually feel about it. It takes courage to actually be vulnerable and say, look, everyone, this is how it's making me feel. This is why I don't want it to happen again. Here's my plan, and so on. And if I can offer you a counter example of what happens if you take the opposite road.
Absolutely.
Don't have the courage or the self-awareness, because I think it's quite an important contrast and seeing the difference. So we've got that really hugely positive example where the power that can have and the eventual positive result for the company as well. If you take the other road, what happens is people are leaving. There's some challenging times with that business. And so the leadership, rather than taking the courage, self-awareness route, they double down and they say, well, these people are leaving, but it's fine. We didn't need them anyway. What good are they to us? And so what happens then? More people leave because they see how little they are valued, and so they leave as well. And I was one of the ones who left as well, by the way, in that example.
Yes.
So there's such a contrast there, and there's such a big lesson in that, I think.
Absolutely. And I bet that, I don't know how it was in your case, but I know that people who leave will not shut their mouths. They will also tell other people. And so when we go to the first part of the recruitment process, that will have an impact on the company brand as well. So exactly to that point, I mean, how people are treated inside of the company also has a ripple effect on, for example, how customers perceive, the value of the services or products that they offer. So it's not just an internal question. The ripple effect is huge.
Yeah, definitely. And there's been some recent examples of that, haven't there? Well, recent-ish. There's quite a big, well-known brewery in the UK who had a big issue with that, exactly that. And the people are the brand, but it's quite difficult it's quite easy to overlook that and quite difficult to put it back once it's too late.
Yeah.
And in that particular example, there was an open letter signed by, I think, a couple of hundred employees or something like that who had left, and it was all about the toxic culture and all that kind of thing. And once that's out there, I wouldn't go and work at that company now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so short-sighted. I have heard the exact same words. Well, we didn't need them anyway. Duh. Don't you see what's happening afterwards? But then again, I have to say, I remember in the early years of my career as a fresh leader, I thought, because I had no training towards leadership. It was more, how do you manage the processes? How do you build an operational plan or a project plan, a budget, scope, resources plan? Everyone wants to be a number on the Excel spreadsheet, right? But still, how I considered to be credible and trustworthy with the stone face when things got tough, stick to it and don't show any emotion. That's how I thought you build trust and credibility. And in some circumstances, it did work. But in the long run, it was also exhausting to me to hold that facade there or hide behind the mask. So also why I encourage people to be more of who they are, the authentic selves in a responsible way. It will take off the burden of, trying to be someone else. And again, you have more energy for leading yourself and others.
Yeah, I mean, to offer a clumsy analogy, it's like if you have a bottle of fizzy drink, isn't it? And the more and more you shake it without taking the lid off, eventually it's going to burst.
Yeah,
so you've got to have that kind of release valve, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I should say one thing, I think, in defense of the "we didn't need them anyway" managers. I think it is a very human response.
It is.
Naturally, you're going to feel defensive in that situation.
Yeah.
It's understandable. I can almost sympathise with it, but at the same time, it doesn't help.
Here. I do understand the reaction, yet there is another way to deal with that. And again, that's part of building the self-awareness. There's always a decision point. How do I deal with that frustration or whatever they are going through in that situation? It's our responsibility. Every single person should take into account. It's my responsibility to deal with that.
Yes, and I think there is a skill, isn't there, in being able to remain calm under pressure, but without keeping that kind of stony face that you mentioned.
Exactly.
You can still emote, but without letting it get out of control and smash the office up or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Because with the stone face, people start to think, well, she doesn't care. She's ignorant. Exactly. And that's definitely not something that I wanted to, be expressed, but still, yeah. Luckily, I was able to get feedback from people, so I was able to learn.
Mm-hmm. And that actually leads us quite nicely into the next question, which is, why is it, do you think, that so many businesses and leaders as individuals struggle with this idea of showing empathy towards their people?
A very good question that I actually was just yesterday discussing with a group of leaders. Why is it so? Why, if we know this, why aren't we doing it? And think there are many angles to that. And I think one of them is, at least my generation, I was not taught of these skills growing up or in the university or even in my early years of career. It was more of the management, be very efficient. And maybe times were less turmoil then, I don't know. And so that's one, the burden of the history maybe. But then the other part is it requires courage. It requires courage to open up. It is easier to be masked behind or hide behind your working role. You would think it's easier in a way. But then again, there's the risk, the risk of feeling ashamed. I think that's on the other part. And then being in a run all the time, rush kills empathy. That's one. Lately I've worked with leaders who are so busy. Their calendars are overloaded. They don't have time to think because these are conscious choices that you need to be aware. Requires for you to be not on an autopilot, but actually here and now, understanding what's happening in me with you in this context and making the conscious choices. If we're operating from autopilot, we are following some deep-rooted habits and attitudes and functioning that is probably not the best in this situation. But that's one of the I think dilemmas in today's work life. Those who have work are too busy to think, to make those conscious choices.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It reminds me actually of a LinkedIn post I saw just this morning from the very excellent Emily and Alan Braithwaite at Yellow Tuxedo. Give them a shout out. They were talking about it in the context of sales and having that "I'm just too busy, I don't have time" kind of excuse or response. And as they say, actually, it's not about not having time, it's about making time.
Yeah.
If you see something as important enough, and I think it applies just as much here for leaders, if you don't make the time, what you're telling people is you don't see them as important enough for you to make that time. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How people will perceive that when you do it.
Yeah, and then linked to that, a topic that I have talked with leaders a lot, because a lot of the leaders attending some trainings actually are those who want to do their job well, who actually care for the people. And so one of the things that I often talk to them about is you need to teach the people to also understand making time, because not everything can be urgent and priority one all the time. So you do not have to be available 24/7. Do the check-in. If a person comes to you with a matter that is not super urgent and they require your time immediately, you can and should tell them, if you're, head over heels with other stuff, saying, you know what, I really want to help you out. But at this moment, I realize that my mind is bugged or tied in some other stuff right now, and I find it impossible to be present for you right now. Can we book a time tomorrow or next week? Would that suit you? So if we always stop everything that we do to help those people, we also send a message that it's okay for everything to be priority number one and super urgent all the time. And that's one thing that I really want to emphasize, that as a leader, you do not have to be available 24/7. You need to be brutally honest with your condition. Are you fit for the job right now? And if you're not, draw boundaries in an empathetic yet assertive way.
You're absolutely right. Yes, it's a question of balance, isn't it? I mean, if everything's urgent, then really nothing's urgent.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I did find it really interesting as well earlier when you were talking about the history as well, and the way that we're just not taught those skills. And I mean, that really, I hugely identify with that as a British man.
I do as a Finnish woman as well.
The stiff upper lip, never show your fear, your feelings, don't cry in front of anyone, all of that kind of horrible sort of thing. And you're right, you go through school and college and university and you're just not taught these skills. And it's not until you get to that crunch point, the exploding bottle of drink, that you realise actually how important those skills are. And so that'll be something I'll throw out there for all the listeners. Learn those skills, start practicing them, because you'll thank yourself in the future.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be a big change. Commit to one thing that you will do differently or try out. And again, I cannot say this with business targets, but with people and people interaction and those skills. It is enough to succeed sometimes. We're human beings. We make errors. And one of the things as a good leader, I think, is also to say, I am sorry. Can we rewind and take this from the beginning? I reacted in a wrong way. People are often very willing to accept the apology when it's genuine and authentic. And that's also a great, great example to build psychological safety. Because errors happen to everyone.
Yeah, and you've got to lead by example there, haven't you? Because it's all very well saying this is a psychologically safe environment, we're happy with you to make mistakes. But if you then break yourself over the coals of your own mistakes.
Oh, you can do it once. That's the best one. I've heard that many, many times. Yeah, this is a safe place to make mistakes, but just do it once. Or
if you make a mistake yourself and then you really kick yourself and everyone sees that you're really angry with yourself about it, then you're setting the wrong example anyway there, aren't you? Because it's you're making an issue out of a mistake. Let's talk a bit more about leadership specifically in terms of your experiences.
Mm-hmm.
My next question then is, what is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned from your career so far?
I think just going back to my early years as a young team lead, to understand and to recognize and consider the fact that people do come to work, whether it's online or in real life, in a physical meeting, there are emotions. So how do we deal with that? How do we address that? How do we create a safe space to express whatever we're going through in a responsible way, to talk about the real stuff? And then the other one is not trying to be something else that you are. As I said, I struggled quite a long time trying to be very cool and collected and tough. And I really heard actually that some people feared me because of that. I'm 5'4", not that strong, But yeah,
that's
I
not
was
what you
able
want to hear, is it?
lead with fear if people were late for my meetings. No, but seriously, being tough is needed at times, but it shouldn't be constant. I mean, what I mean by that is, as a good leader, you also need to have the guts to address and approach someone who's behaving in a bad way or unacceptable way or underperforming or all that stuff. You need to have the guts to address that. You can't close your eyes for that. And sometimes being tough and assertive with the matter at hand is needed, yet understanding that empathy and respect towards the human being is also part of the equation. So it's the balance. And credibility in these days is not built by being a stone face. It's built more of having the courage to share something of your inner world. And as soon as I started to do that, as soon as I started to share my doubts or worries or something that I sensed in the air and speak it out loud, saying, you know what, for example, I sense that we built this agenda, but I'm sensing that this is not relevant for us because no one is really, participating in the conversation. What's going on? Please share with me. And then you're like, oh, well, thank goodness you brought it up because these are not relevant items for us. So also having the guts to have a constant dialogue, to validate our assumptions, and also to teach other people that we lead to validate your assumptions, because that's one of the biggest dilemmas in work life also. An exponential amount of suffering and disappointment because the other person is not reading my eyebrow movement or, so we shouldn't obligate people. We don't have the privilege to obligate people to read our minds. So let's validate the assumptions. If I'm not sure, my responsibility to ask, like, David, what you just said, I interpreted it like this. Did I get you correctly? Or if not, please correct me. So
yes,
I actually shared quite a lot of different things, but those are something of the fundamental core elements of what to take in your toolbox.
Yeah, and I like all of them. I think particularly being assertive and being kind at the same time.
Yeah.
A lot of people see those as mutually exclusive, but they're not.
They are
have
not.
To go together.
Exactly. And again, there's studies backing it up. All of those are both actually elements of emotional intelligence. They can and should be developed.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it applies when you're managing upwards, shall we say? Like, it's not just about the leader to the followers. I think you also need to be able to still be assertive, but without being mean about it. Which is definitely an acquired skill, definitely.
And you're bringing up a very important point to all directions. It's applicable to all directions.
Yeah, indeed. And the point about people bringing their emotions to work and how it's all part of the whole person. Do you think that is something that is more of a challenge with remote work and post-COVID or not?
My personal opinion on this is that, well, I worked in a multicultural team way back in the day, in remote setup. But we had already created ways. We had built the trust and psychological safety with on-site real interactions. And then we had the procedures in place because the backbone or the background was there. A trusting environment was already built and it worked superbly fine. But when people were forced or pushed out due to lockdown and everything else to this different way of working, let's put it that way, it is more complex. It is absolutely more complex, but I hear too often that as an excuse. And it's not an excuse. We can acknowledge that it's hard. And yes, we need to pay more attention to how do we come across? How do we validate the assumptions, especially in the hybrid work life? There's so many, misunderstandings and all that nonsense. And if we take a step back and every time we sense a tiny bit of uncertainty, let's do the check-in, validate. All right, so what did we agree as the next steps? Or what did we decide right now? Because if we don't do that, it will be XYZ interpretations going on and we lose efficiency. So it's absolutely more complex, but it is not undoable. It requires more attention, more awareness, more of the validation. But again, talking about it, let's all recognize or acknowledge that it is not so easy. So what can we do to work in this situation with these people? What can I do as an individual? What can we do as a group? And then one thing, as a leader, I will commit to this. What will you do next? And that's another example of what's missing oftentimes from the equation. Good leaders ask or commit to all kinds of tricks and then they don't ask the question. So what are you committing to? What's the next step that you will do to avoid this kind of thing happening in the future?
Yes, I think that's really important for the shared accountability, isn't it? And yeah, I mean, I guess the communication side of it, I think right from the start really of remote working, I've always seen it as it's the same problems we've always had. Yeah. It's just because we're now not able to pick up on some of those more subtle body language clues because we're not in the same room. You just got to be more conscious and a bit more intentional about it. And the questions you ask, the frequency that you have a conversation with someone, all those little things that add up. And as you say, it's more complex. It's a bit more difficult, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, where's the focus? Do we spend all our energy saying, oh, this is so hard? Or do we take it in and think, what can I do from my part? So, and what can we do collectively? So just as you said, to be more conscious, to be more aware. And yet it is absolutely also important to mention that when we do need to do all the interpretation without, understanding what's actually happening, or we don't see each other, it is draining. So it's super draining, even if, we don't physically do anything. But still, for our brain, it's mentally draining to try to interpret things based on the voice, for example, alone. And I really, really strongly recommend to try it out. If people are, having black screens, and invite them to explore what happens if we turn on the screens for 5 seconds. to see the faces and then turn them off again. What happens? How does it impact me, my energy level, my perception of the situation, my self-regard, my willingness to contribute to the conversation? So again, going away from a yes or no, this or that, explore, how does it impact? What kind of impact does it do? And one of the innate needs, as I mentioned, is to be seen, is people to feel seen and to feel that people are interested in me, and especially the leaders are showing interest in me as a human being. Controversially, in this hybrid work life, it happens by me turning on my camera to make eye contact with you. So just again, one of the tips, if you want to be seen, turn on your camera.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like that's common sense, doesn't it? But you're right. It's too easy to just turn the camera off, and once you've done that, you're not being watched, and so it's easy to stop paying attention. And before you know it, someone's saying your name 4 times because they asked you a question 10 minutes ago and you haven't responded.
Oh, and I need to add one more thing: presence. We're often too polite to tolerate people not being present. But as leaders, we should actually have the courage. And I think it's an obligation to also invite people to be present, saying, could I have your full attention for 5 minutes? I would greatly appreciate that. With good intentions, being honest and yet very assertive also, that, I would really appreciate your full attention for the next 5 minutes. So that's powerful. But oftentimes people tolerate, and then in the back of our heads we go, I don't know if anyone is interested in my topic or even listening or paying attention. And again, think of how much energy is wasted on the fear of shame.
Yes, I think that's equally important in both directions, isn't it? Again, it's back to this reciprocal nature of leadership. I think the leader has to be present too.
Yeah.
And the classic one for me is they're in a meeting with you and they've got their phone and they're texting.
Oh, yeah.
While you're talking, they're not really paying attention to you. And yeah, I mean, I used to do a thing if I was in a meeting with someone like that and they were on their phone, I would just stop talking.
Yeah.
And just see how long it took before they noticed. The average was about 5 minutes, which is quite shocking.
Yep, that's a good one.
Anyway.
Yeah, I haven't had the guts to wait for 5 minutes, but I've done that too.
Yeah, well, you get to a point where it's happened so many times and you're just fed up. It's just like, right, fine.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. Anyway, what has been then your own best experience of being led?
My best experience of being led was when I was leading a project, a multicultural project team, and this project owner, our CFO, offered her undeniably support, had time to listen, and really walk the talk with me in tough situations when we had to renegotiate with multiple vendors and do all that contract negotiations and present the new figures for the board of directors and to get permission for an extended budget. She never left me alone. I always felt that she would have my back no matter what, and that she trusted me in the decisions that I made as on an operational level. And yet I always had the bigger picture, to reflect with her. And I greatly admire her calmness, although she is a lady who can get a lot of things done, but I never felt that she was in a rush with me. She always had time and she was always present. So that's something that I still, and again, this is a good example. I remember the feeling of working with her. I don't remember what she told me exactly, but I do remember, and it brings a warmth in my heart to go back to those years that we worked together.
It is funny that, isn't it? How you remember how they made you feel rather than what they necessarily said or did.
Yeah.
And again, it goes both ways, doesn't it? I mean, I have a similar experience with a really great leader from way early in my career. And even now I remember thinking, yeah, do you know what? We didn't have that many encounters, but he did do things that made me feel like I belonged in that organization.
Yeah.
And I was a temp as well in that role.
Oh, wow.
So making a temp feel like they belong, that's quite impressive. I mean, first of all, because you've taken the time to do it, but second of all, they're temporary by nature. It's in the name.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a really, really great experience. And yet,
Yeah.
and then by contrast, I also have a really horrible experience as well later in my career. And even now, like I think about it and I start feeling myself get a bit stressed out about it.
Yeah.
And it was years and years back.
Yeah.
And it's just the impact a leader can have, for good or bad, for really the rest of your career.
The emotional footprint that we leave.
I like that. That's
to
a good
be
phrase.
aware, because everyone will remember, how did it feel with that person? Could I be myself fully, trust in the person's goodwill and support? Or did I need to be a little bit of walking on the eggshells all the time? Or, we will remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, it's a huge responsibility. Okay, and you got a couple of questions left. We must be having fun because time's flying.
I am happy. I would continue this discussion with you. I greatly admire your work and talking about being a leader, not a boss. It's super important to understand the difference.
Yeah, well, I obviously believe that. So
I do too.
If you could go back in time to the start of your career, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, I did many mistakes as I was sharing. My assumptions of what it means to be a human being at work was completely odd. So I think that's one. Maybe the start goes way back when I was choosing what to major in. And I remember walking in the corridor of Helsinki School of Economics, and I was looking at, there was no internet or anything. It was paper on a wall, and I was checking what was the major subject, the hardest to get into the past year. And it was finance. So I made the decision. That's where I'm going to do. That's where I'm going to go. And everything all the decisions that the younger me did was because faster, higher, better, more titles, career, all that. And I was not at all aware of how my heart felt about it. Because to this day, I can confess, I know nothing about finance. I got excellent grades because I was super good at studying, but I have no clue whatsoever if I were to work in that sector. I would be the worst hire ever. And I think that is a great example of going back to what you said in the beginning. When we make the decisions, do we have the courage to consider both sides, the rational mind and the emotion? Because if the emotion is not there, there's no true motivation, there's no true commitment, there's no true nothing. So have the courage. I hope I had the courage to pause and think, what do I need? What do I want? But no, I didn't. Luckily, people can change. Now I'm more towards that, but still, I know when things get tough, my primitive reaction is, let's just push them more. So this is a twisted relationship, but the work I do these days is challenging me every single day. So that's why I enjoy it so much.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, interesting one. I think, I'd probably say something the same, actually. Because I had 2 attempts at a bachelor's degree. I ended up doing politics because I found it interesting, and therefore I passed. But before that, I tried economics, which I didn't find interesting, and I failed. So it's exactly as you say. There's definitely a relationship there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing.
Leadership heroes.
Okay, last question. This is one of my favourites. I ask every guest this question.
All right.
I call it Leadership Heroes.
Mm.
And the question is, if you had to pick one person, they could be alive or dead, past, present, real or fictitious, if you wish, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
I'm going to offer you a challenge because I don't want to provide a name. Honestly, I don't like the hero concept because it glorifies and it makes people not human beings. In my mind, it's just in my mind. But a hero or someone who I greatly would admire is someone who understands the leadership not being a technical competence, but an attitude, an approach towards every interaction that I have. And the one thing that I admire or in my rank goes higher than anything is how people treat other human beings, irrespective of their background or working role or rank or title. And that's the number one factor for me that makes a leadership hero. How do you treat other people, especially in crisis, especially when times are tough, especially when you yourself are challenged? How do you treat another human being or the people around you?
Okay, I can't disagree with anything you've said there.
Can you accept that?
Yeah, no, I can. I think there's potentially some examples we could
Yes.
talk about, and I think that's why when people ask me this question, occasionally they do, my answers tend to be fictitious characters, because I kind of agree with you. Hero is something that in the real world, but in fiction it's a lot easier because then it's more about something you can aspire to be, which I think is what hero is really about. However, with the explanation you just gave, one example that popped into my head was John F. Kennedy. And the reason for that is the story about that visit he did to NASA back in the 60s, where he saw a janitor sweeping the hallway and just went and struck a conversation with him. So, hi, I'm Jack. What do you do here? And that's exactly what you're talking about, isn't it? Is how they treat people regardless of status or rank and so on and so forth. You could be cynical and say, would he still have done that if nobody was there to watch it? But
I don't care. That's a great example and exactly what I meant.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Awesome. Well, it's been lovely chatting with you today.
Super inspiring, and I would love to continue on and on and on and on. But yes, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're most welcome. And if the listeners perhaps want to learn a bit more about you and what you do, is there a website or a podcast or a book that you'd like to point them towards?
Oh, yeah. There's a book. It's in Finnish, but we're doing an English version. So it's going to be out next spring, 2024. Leading with Emotional Agency is the working name for that. Best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with like-minded people, or if you are, if you have another opinion, very happy to chat about leadership, making work-life better for individuals and businesses. So please connect with me.
I'll put your LinkedIn link in the episode description as well, so people can find you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for your time today. It's been great.
Thank you so much, David.
And that was brilliant. Thank you again, Ira, for your time today. It was great to see you again, and it was a really enjoyable conversation. Listeners, if you would like to learn more about Emoji, about emotional agency, and about the work that Ira and her colleagues get up to, I've put a link to her LinkedIn profile in the episode description. So please do reach out and start a conversation. I'm sure she'll be happy to hear from you. If you'd like to learn more about leading with integrity, if you're looking for some help, some support, an impartial third party or third pair of ears to help you with your leadership, if you do have a particular management challenge that you're struggling with right now, and if any of what we've talked about today has struck a chord with you, again, I've put a link in the episode description for you to reach out and get in touch with me. That link is www.leadernotaboss.com. That'll take you to a small web page which has a little video there all about my new Integrity Leaders group membership. It also has a bit further down a link to my calendar if you would like to book a call and have a conversation with me about any of these topics and see how I might be able to help you with your leadership challenges. That's all I've got time for today. Thank you so much for listening as always, and hopefully I will see you again next time. In the meantime, remember, be a leader, not a boss.